During the time of the Me Too and Time's Up movements, the idea of consent has been brought to the surface of discussions across the United States and has ultimately shifted our culture. The Me Too movement gained momentum after allegations of Harry Weinstein started a flood of victims standing up against the sexual harassment and assault he perpetrated. The goal of the Me Too movement is to create a community of survivors that can move forward together. The Time's Up movement is a more solution-based movement. It aims to create change such as getting legislation passed and policies changed, which will lead to safety and equity in the workplace. The Time's Up movement was started by 300 women in Hollywood. These two movements are rooted in the lack of understanding of what consent means. Consenting and asking for consent are all about setting your personal boundaries and respecting those of your partner, and checking if things aren't clear.
So for our project, we interviewed 4 Tiger High School teachers, asking them how they teach consent in their classrooms. We asked Sydney Polici, the on-track coordinator here at Tiger High School. We also asked Jesse Abel, health teacher. We also asked Tim Hummel, another health teacher. And we asked Alice Venner-Gailey, personal family studies teacher. So first question, we asked, in your health class, does consent come up during your sex ed unit? And if so, how much do you speak on it and what do you say? If no, do you think it should be?
So it's really important as a health teacher to talk about consent. It is in the state standards to talk about as of last year. I started teaching about consent a few years ago, and I started by using a video that relates drinking tea to sexual activity and how crazy it would be to pour tea down somebody's throat who doesn't want tea, and we wouldn't do that, so why would we do it with sexual activity? Also, one of the really big things as far as consent goes, talking to students, is that consent is really a part of any relationship, not just a sexual relationship or a romantic relationship. It's part of setting boundaries for yourself and being healthy with others.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea, thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea. At all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, "Yes, please. That's kind of you." And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, "Do you want tea?" because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, "But you wanted tea last week." Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, "But you wanted tea last night." But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything.
Well, I definitely think it should be. I would say consent is one of the main pillars of that unit in my class. We talk about it a lot. We talk about it on multiple different days, and every time we change topics, we kind of refer back to it. just as a piece of overall healthy communication, I guess. What I teach about it is that the main thing is just that the dumbest saying ever created is that no means no, because consent is about a lot more than that, and the absence of a no doesn't mean yes. So we talk about the traits of how it has to be freely given without any coercion. It can't be involving alcohol. It can't be involving any pressure of like, I don't know, them being mad at you or anything like that. You need renewed consent for every different action, and it's reversible at any time. So we go over a lot of different characteristics of it and how it is a little more complicated than just no means no.
Yeah, I don't talk on it very much. I probably should, because I think it's really important for kids to learn about, and I think that consent is all about communication. From that standpoint, I talk about communication a lot as far as relationships go, but the official law definition of it, I don't go into it. We used to have a guest speaker that came in and talked about consent, just because there can be some crimes committed and damaged relationships and reputations if that's not clear. And so I think it needs to be covered a lot more in detail. Yeah.
It does come up. We just had a guest speaker, Sally Blackwood, came in from CARES Northwest, and she showed a great video that I would recommend watching, which is Consent is Like a Cup of Tea. It's really kind of fun and simple, but it really makes the point. So I don't really address it, but I bring someone in to do that.
So for our second question, we asked, before you talk about consent, does it seem like your students know what consent is and that it's needed in all sexual situations?
No, I don't think that they know what it is and that it's needed in all sexual situations. And I think a lot of students make the mistake that if they are sexually active, that somehow they think that opens up the floodgates of their sexual activity. So they kind of feel like if they've done it once, then they have given consent that one time, and that's like permanently consent.
Yes, all the time.
Yes. So it's everybody's choice the first time and every single time after that, not just the one time. So it is really important to talk about that aspect of it as well.
That's a very mixed bag on that, I would say. I think that students are more kind of aware of it than they have been in the past, but all of the little intricacies of it, they still don't quite understand. They usually get hung up on the fact that if people are drunk, they can't give consent, and sometimes students struggle a little bit with the idea that you can go from saying yes to something and then change your mind and say no, and then that means consent is gone.
No, not at all. They don't know what it means. I don't think they understand. They don't have a good understanding of it. Part of that is probably because we don't tackle it like we should, or address it like we need to. And so, yeah, that's something that we need to definitely put in the curriculum more, because, I just think that that way people know where the expectations are, and so no, we don't cover it, and I think that kids need to know more about it, yeah.
I think it's needed in all situations, and even if they do know about it, I think it's important to revisit it, because they're continuing to get in different relationships and mature and all of that, and I think it's probably a good idea to revisit more than once in a lifetime.
So for our third question, we asked, are there different ways you should teach consent when speaking to males versus when speaking to females?
I think that I don't teach it differently when I talk to either gender, but I definitely do talk about the social expectations and what the outcomes are and how they're different for females compared to males.
That's like a big part of it.
Yeah, so what happens when a guy has sex with a bunch of people? Fist bumps.
Yeah.
Chest jumping things. What happens when a girl is sexually active or is even considered to be sexually active, even though it might not be true? She gets called names. Why the double standard? Why is our society like that? So I bring that to the attention of my students, because the only way you're going to change society is by being the change.
It's a really interesting question. I don't believe that it should be different. I think that it's the same. It's the same for both men and women. You get into an interesting situation when you split people up by that, because it kind of reinforces some gender stereotypes. And I think that what consent is doesn't change if you're a guy or you're a girl, and that it should be taught the same.
Kind of, not really. I think consent's consent. I would say no, because I would say that with consent is you don't want to lead somebody on. You don't want to give them the wrong messages. And I think that goes both ways, whether it's how you dress, what you're saying, what you're doing, whether you're male or female or however you identify, whatever that is. I don't think it matters. I think that communication is communication. It's got to be clear. You got to be honest about it, and the thing is it can turn out to where, in a lot of cases, to where it's, what he said, she said kind of thing, or what they said, and so, yeah, I think that this is a good thing to be discussing, because it's something that I think really needs to be covered in high school in preparation for college later on down the road, because, there's can be some potential big time dangers.
No, I think we should just kind of keep it pretty straightforward. Consent is consent. It doesn't matter if you're a male or a female. I think everybody should hear about it and learn about it the same way.
Fourth question, we asked, has the conversation changed surrounding consent as the times have changed?
For sure. So much. #MeToo. Okay, I mean, that whole movement has brought this subject to the forefront, not only of, high school students and adults alike, but it's in the forefront of the media. It's in the forefront of everything. It's on Twitter, it's on Instagram, and everybody just feels so empowered right now to share their stories, and it's really drawing a line in the sand right now of what is appropriate, what's inappropriate. So the times have changed, and I couldn't be more excited to think about all of the young ladies, especially who are here at Tigard High School, that they might not have to go through things that we had to go through.
I think so. I think it is a little bit more talked about, and I think, like I said, the saying "no means no" used to be the gold standard for talking about consent, and I think we've gotten a lot better about understanding what it actually means to consent to something and what a lack of consent looks like. So I think it's gotten better.
I think they have. I just don't know. I don't know exactly what examples I could give, but I do think consent's changed just because culture's changed. I think times have changed. I think expectations have changed over the years. It's a lot different from now, from in the 50s, or whatever.
Right.
And I think that a lot of times, and I also think that I think the expectations in relationships, and I also think the communication relationships have changed, and I also think the relationship expectations as far as the culture goes have changed. And a lot of relationships now, not all, but a lot from the cultural standpoint is, I think a lot of the goals in relationships have shifted. In other words, I'm not so sure the focus is on the relationship so much nowadays. It's a lot more focused on sexual activity. I think it's focused on a lot of other things that our culture tends to celebrate, and they automatically think because you have sex, or that you love somebody, or that if you love me, then you'll get involved sexually. I don't know. I think that could be questioned as well. So, but yeah, I think it's changed and shifted over the years for sure.
I think so. I don't think this was something that I necessarily talked about when I first started teaching personal family studies maybe 15 years ago, but with the way things have been changing and people are a little bit more aware of that it's okay to stand up for what you believe and what you need and what you don't want, I think it's probably a good idea to address in high school and as our students get ready to go on to college especially.
Both people must agree to sex every single time for it to be consensual. Consent impacts people of all ages, especially in high school, as teenagers engage in relationships that may lead to sexual situations. As we interviewed teachers at Tigard High School with the goal of finding out how they teach consent, it was brought to our attention that each teacher teaches it in a different way and to different extents. In a survey of 2,012 people ages ranging 18 to 95, Planned Parenthood found that 63% of people think too little is done to educate high school students on sexual assault, and that is why we believe there needs to be an increased amount of curriculum regarding consent and sexual assault in health classes.